Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. That is also a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, I'm going to have Dave joining me from West Fork Whiskey and Old Hamer. We have a really fun conversation about what they're doing, about Indiana whiskey, all of those wonderful things, and how, maybe Kentucky whiskey is not nearly as unique as we want it to be. Hope you guys enjoy.
How often do you get 90s or 80s movies references asked to you?
At work, all the time. On the podcast, rarely, because it's a really weird subsection of people. You get people that are either way older or way younger, and so 90s don't hit for a lot of the people that I end up talking to.
Gotcha.
But a lot. Cool. All right. You should see it's recording. Got it. Cool.
Yep.
All right. This morning, this afternoon, this evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this podcast, I have David joining me from West Fork Whiskey / Old Hamer. If you would, Dave, just kind of give us the long and short of who you are and who the distillery is.
Yeah, so I'm Dave McIntyre, one of the three co-founders of West Fork Whiskey Company. We're three guys, childhood friends. Well, I guess I'm the friend. The other two are brothers. We all grew up in Southern Indiana, going on vacations together whenever we were like 8, 9 years old. And from there, our friendships grew. But we kind of stumbled upon whiskey in our own way. We all were going to school in different states, but around that start of the craft revolution, that 2010 to 2013 time frame was right around the time that we all developed a true passion for bourbon. Obviously at that time 99% of it was Kentucky related product, but we saw this beginning to essentially a new industry was in its infancy. It's kind of like how beer was before the craft boom. There was a few players, a few big guys in Kentucky that were dominating the bourbon market, just like, there used to just be Miller, Coors, Bud back in the day. And I think around that time frame, there was just over 200 distilleries licensed in the United States. I don't have the current figures, but I know we're in the thousands now over the last 10 to 12 years. And so we thought, if we ever wanted to get into something unique and get in early enough in an industry, that was the time frame. So I was in my final semester of law school, and just one weekend I said, okay, we're doing this. We know nothing about it other than that we like bourbon, but we're going to give it a shot. So I filed our articles of incorporation. Around 6 months later, I moved back to Indiana. Blake, one of our other co-founders, and I had cubicles together at a bank here in Indianapolis, and we spent 6 months business planning, figured out that we knew nothing about science. I took one science class, and actually I took two because I failed one, and so I had to take another one, but we're not science guys at all. So we brought in Blake's brother Julian as our third co-founder. He's got a heavy science background, and he's always been the science arm of our operation and head distiller. And so, around June 2015, we cashed out our 401ks, maxed out some credit cards, and started doing this thing on a 55-gallon still on nights and weekends. And we'll get into the rest of the history, but it's been a wild decade for sure.
So you just mentioned that all three of you kind of grew up together in the same hometown, having a lot of same experiences at the same time. Obviously, there's going to be some age gaps that exist there because you're not triplets.
Yep.
But you're near the Old Hamer family land, near what is the Spring Mill State Park. Sort of as you build out the vision for West Fork and Old Hamer, how much hometown influence kind of leaned into that? Because you can go a number of different ways. You could just say we're creating our own thing, or you can become like the hometown hero. How much of that did you do?
I would say in the beginning, it was much less hometown hero and more just pride in the state of Indiana.
Mhm.
You know, everyone attributes bourbon to Kentucky. You know, they have for a very, very long time, and we still have people to this day that'll say, "How are you calling this bourbon? You're not in Kentucky." But we looked at it and we said, "Well, Kentucky uses predominantly, Indiana corn." They talk about their temperature fluctuations. Well, we actually have greater temperature fluctuations than they do, and they talk about their hard limestone water. I mean, we grew up in the limestone capital of the world. Indiana has very hard water as well, so we have everything that it takes, and in my opinion, better environment to be making bourbon, and really no one had been doing it. And so it would be more state pride than local hometown pride
Mhm.
in the beginning, and really ever since. I mean, we're very proud of our roots and where we came from, and the hardworking town and area that we're from. But it's always been about putting Indiana on the map. Obviously, we've had MGP for the entirety of this time period, and now we have multiple really high quality bourbon manufacturing distilleries in Indiana. But at that time, it was let's put the state on the map as a serious hardcore whiskey producer. And the Hamer thing didn't come until another 3-4 years down the line. So.
Mhm. So, and you mentioned this, right? So, Kentucky, I live in the state of Kentucky, but I'm on the far western end of the state, and they sort of forget we exist sometimes over here.
Yep.
So, we talk a lot about our water, right? But that's the same aquifer that feeds almost all of the Ohio River Valley, which you guys kind of lean into that as well.
Yep.
There's a number of things that people identify, and you can spend weeks arguing on social media with people who are like, bourbon's Kentucky only, bourbon's Kentucky only. And
Yep.
even in 2010, right, you got this giant of MGP that's making a lot of whiskey that people are maybe passing off as Kentucky whiskey without saying it, right? Like they're like, yeah, this is our brand. They're
Yeah.
buying it from
Yeah,
somewhere else.
there was some shoddy business practices back then, for sure.
Right, because not NDPs and being a brand without a distillery was kind of looked down upon at that point in time. But as you've sort of developed out uh, your particular brand and your particular piece of the bourbon industry, you guys have described yourself as hell bent on creating a uniquely Indiana and Midwest bourbon and whiskey. Now, given all of the things that Kentucky tries to lay claim to, um, what unique characteristics do you think that you guys are getting that makes Indiana sort of its own style?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because, as a bourbon manufacturer, decisions that we made in 2016, 2017, those are just coming to fruition over the last few years. So I would say initially we listened a lot to our distribution partners, and we created our mash bills that were, very prevalent on the corn side, but also pretty standard to a traditional Kentucky mash bill. Only thing that was that different about us was, our process is a touch different. But from a mash bill perspective, we historically rarely use malted barley, just because we have commercial enzymes today, and malted barley, you can argue for hours online about that as well, but in our opinion, doesn't do a ton from a flavor perspective. Historically, it's obviously used for its enzymatic properties. But then in 2019, with the launch and resurrection of the Old Hamer brand, it's 99% corn, 1% malted barley. It's incredibly sweet, incredibly versatile. When you're not adding in a high amount of wheat or rye or even barley, we found that it's just a tremendous mash bill that people have really welcomed and loved, and it's fairly true to the Hamer family. Do we have the exact recipe that Hugh Hamer was using? No, we do not. But we know that he was using excess grain from local farmers. He probably would have had to use a little bit more barley just to get those enzymes, but
Mhm.
we know it was a very corn forward mash bill, and over the years we've loved it, and we're leaning into it more on the production side of the house now. I mean, Indiana, you think about Indiana as a state, you think basketball, Indianapolis 500, and corn. Um, and so, we want to be a very predominantly corn forward distillery. It's an amazing grain. It's a sweet grain. We know people other than rye is a popular segment, but it's nowhere near the popularity of bourbon. People like sweeter, approachable things, unless you get really into the hardcore folks, which is great. But that's when, with those high corn mash bills, you can do other things with it. You can double oak it, you can finish it. The longer aging just produces a super unique flavor profile that many people haven't tried anything like it these days. So heavy corn would be the short answer to that question. It's what we do best in Indiana, and that's where we want to go as a distillery.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. Like a 99, 99.1, 90, right? 99.1.
99.1. Yep.
Yeah, the 99.1 is not super prevalent in the state of Kentucky, and you're right about the malted barley argument. It's just a different group of more educated people. The people who are like, oh, Kentucky only bourbon, usually aren't very well educated, but the people with malted barley have just enough information to be dangerous, but not enough to hold that. But I guess my question then becomes, if you're not necessarily needing it for the enzymatic conversion, what keeps you from being 100% corn?
Nothing. On the Hamer side, unlike the interesting business practices of the 2010s and around that time period, we've been very open about the Hamer product since it launched. I mean, that is produced at MGP, and they were producing a small amount of 99.1 at that time. And so that mash bill won't change. I'll tell you, on the West Fork side, we have a lot of internal discussions. 100% corn, we really like the idea, but is that all number two dent standard distiller's corn, or is it roasted? Is it malted? Is it bloody butcher corn? There's thousands of varietals of corn out there, and which ones do you choose? What percentages of each? We've done a small amount of production on those different varietals of corn throughout the years, and some have been fantastic. Some have been just crazy unique. We don't want to get too far out there to where it's just a small percentage of people are willing to buy the product once just to try it. So we don't want to get too niche, but we need to position ourselves as not just, hey, we're making the same recipe that they're making in Lexington. We got to make a name for ourselves, a name for our state. And, I think we've done a good job over the last 10 years, but I think, as we move forward, we'll certainly lean into it more.
So you've been around since 2014, right? And that's a long time in whiskey age, right? Because if you can make it out of the first 4 or 5 years, you're probably going to be around for a little while, because whiskey production, whiskey making, whiskey sales is not necessarily an easy game. But over the course of 11 years at this point, what was there a degree of expectation that you thought you were going to see kind of this boom of whiskey that did happen, or you just saw that there was an increasing trend and you wanted to be there, or you just really liked whiskey?
I think initially we were incredibly naive. I think most people, you have to have a certain level of naivety to even get into this racket, because it's incredibly capital intensive. You're making a product that you spend a bunch of money on day one, and you don't have a product for quite some time. Whenever we first started, we were one of the many producers out there that were using small barrels. So our first bourbons were coming out after 8 to 16 months in 5, 10, 15 gallon barrels, and that produces a good product, but it's a different flavor profile that's not really comparable to traditional bourbons, which I don't mind new things, but when you're selling bourbon, it's going to get compared no matter how new, how fresh you are. they're going to compare you to Weller or Buffalo Trace or, whatever it may be. And so, we did a good job, but the market, it changes, especially recently we're finding out it changes all the time. Whenever we launched, we were in a really good spot because there weren't as many craft local producers out there. So, it was not easy. We worked our asses off, but, getting some market acceptance, getting some placements, some cocktail bars, we had some really good wins. I mean, within 2 years of launching, Blake and I drove down to Bentonville, Arkansas, and got approved to go into all 108 Walmarts in Indiana. So we had some great wins, but the small barrel aspect of it bit us in the ass at one point, and we had some barrels that weren't dried for long enough, and all of a sudden we'd put back, I don't remember off the top of my head, call it 50 15-gallon barrels of whiskey, which in 2017 18 was a lot of bourbon for us. Pretty much all of it ended up tasting like corn husk and dirt and grass, just because of the wood, which was tragic. It's now been taken out of those barrels and put in to use 53s, and it's still sitting in our warehouse to this day. Super unique product. But that was a big issue for us at the time, because that was a lot of inventory we were sitting on. And at the end of the day, though, it led us to the Hamer mash bill. That was, take us to 2018, 2019. It's when we decided we're no longer going to produce bourbon into small barrels. It's just not feasible. It's more expensive. It might be quicker, but the product isn't as good as we want it to be. You have to go, in our opinion, with at least 30-gallon barrels, but preferably 53-gallon barrels, and be hitting, at that time our goal was to hit 2 years. Now we're at the point that everything that we, bottle is over 4. But, we knew we had to go a little bit longer on the aging and commit to that, which meant, okay, we need to pull all of the West Fork whiskey products off the shelves, take it out of distribution in 2019. And it was out of distribution until 2024. But that led us to, okay, well, as a corporation, it's probably still important for us to try to make money. And through some research, we knew of the Hamer family. We'd been to Spring Mill many times growing up, Hamer Cemetery, Hamer Cave, all of that, but we didn't know as much about the whiskey manufacturing side of it. But the pieces all fell together, and it's this very symbiotic relationship with our home county, hometown, this historic Indiana brand. And so it was the perfect time to partner with MGP, cultivate that high corn mash bill, and focus all of our distribution on the Hamer line, and then just focus all of our production side of the house on longer age statements, and full size barrels. And then you get into, this is a long-winded answer, obviously, but then you get back to just the market dynamics, wins, losses, things like that, things that we've expected, unexpected. We went through the COVID boom, which is the greatest time for whiskey sales ever, by a long shot. And now you have, the opposite over the last 18 months. You've seen, the market hasn't cratered, but, the 5 to 15% gains year over year are all of a sudden drops. And you're seeing it in the news all the time now. I mean, people cutting production, people filing for bankruptcy. You'll see more of it. I'm sure more of it this year. So now it's the polar opposite. I mean, we came from a time that it was the easiest to sell bourbon that it had ever been in the history of the world. And now we took a 10-year step back, which it's going to get even harder. You had those big Kentucky players, investing billions, doubling their capacity. That bourbon's about to be hitting the market here in the not so distant future. So we're going to be flooded with bourbon. So competition's going to get even greater. So we've seen a lot over the last decade, for sure.
Yeah, it definitely feels like we're gearing up for a knife fight in the 4 to 6 year whiskey realm, right? Anybody who has 4 to 6 year, it's going to be you cut prices. And I think you mentioned earlier, like you've got these small barrels that you had to recast, which is I really like this idea, and using that to try to kind of maybe mellow it, make a unique product here. I think you got an opportunity to do like a craft distiller tour for anybody who wants to open up a craft distillery and use small barrels. Like, hey, come in and taste this thing that we did and see what could go
Yeah.
wrong if you don't make sure that your producers of barrels are aging appropriately. Whatever happens there. But through the course of that, you said you guys were using a 55-gallon still when you were doing the smaller format barrels. Then you stopped production on anything that's West Fork for about 5 years, or stop selling anything that's
Distribution.
West Fork.
Yeah. We
Distribution. That's
sold
what
it
I was looking for.
exclusively through our tasting room
Mhm.
that we had downtown. It was the only place you could get West Fork products. And yeah, I didn't get much into the still side. So our first still was 55-gallon still. We only used it for probably 8 months.
Mhm.
And then we increased our capacity to 272 gallons still. And then a few years after that, right around the launch of the Hamer line, early 2019, we increased to a 600-gallon still.
Mhm.
And that's when we started filling full size barrels as well.
And that seems to be a common theme amongst new craft distillers is that there's always two stills that are sitting there from where we thought this was going to be big enough, and then we thought the next one was going to be big enough. Of course, you're also looking for revenue to be able to purchase a new still because those things aren't cheap, right? Like
No.
they're industrial equipment that cost industrial prices. But you mentioned a little bit earlier on, kind of tickling the fancy of whiskey nerds by taking something like the Hamer line, which is a 99.1, and then aging it in other casks. And you guys have a rum finish, you have a double oak finish. How do you pick what kind of finishes that you want to do, whether it be double oak or rum or anything else?
Well, I mean, we have the benefit of being small.
Mhm.
I guess we're large for a craft distillery, but in the grand scheme of things, we're still
Mhm.
tiny compared to the major players out there. So we can try things, and we don't have to do it at scale. If Buffalo Trace is going to release a finished product,
Mhm.
even in their smallest batches, I'm sure we're talking about hundreds of barrels. Whereas for us, I mean, we can get super unique and we can do it barrel by barrel. So the double oak and the rum, those are widely accepted you know finishes that have been done. They're popular. You're not going to go wrong with those. So those have always been the ones that's like, okay, this is a consistent product that we feel comfortable putting back. But then we've had some huge wins and some huge losses on other finishes. I mean, we're still sitting on 4 barrels of Chardonnay cask finish that were awful
Mhm.
initially. They've now been in their third cask out of the Chardonnay into a third cask for 4 or 5 years at this point. They're probably 12 to 14-year-old bourbon now, and they're actually starting to taste great. But I mean, that one was, well, we just wasted 4 barrels of 5 6-year-old bourbon trying that project. But then other finishes have been super unique and super well received, but just done at smaller scales
Mhm.
and via single barrels, whether it be apple brandy finish, plum jerkum finished. Anytime we can actually get used 53-gallon honey barrels, those
Mhm.
are just always fantastic finishes. Yeah, I mean, we've probably tried over, it's got to be close to 20 different finishes
Mhm.
over the last 5 6 years. And the majority of them, some super unique. They wouldn't be things that would be widely accepted by everyone. Um, but all of them have been really good, other than that damn Chardonnay. That's the only one that I regret.
Well, I mean, a 12 to 14 year Chardonnay finish is pretty unique to the market, and there's whiskey nerds out there that'll absolutely purchase that. I know Barton tried the Chardonnay finish a handful of years ago with that. It was a bottle that looked like a casket, if I remember correctly. But anyways,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it it I still see some of those floating around on the shelf, so it is an effort to try to figure out what finishes you want to do. But you said the rum finish has been pretty successful. How do you go about deciding? Because rum is another spirit, right? How do you go about deciding where you're going to source your casks from, or what? Do you look at a brand of rum and then try to get their barrels, or do you just get the rum barrels that are available to you?
Um, that goes with the ever changing market dynamics. There were times that you couldn't get any barrel of any kind. So if
Mhm.
someone said, "Hey, we have this rum," it would say, "Okay, let's take that rum." I mean, we're talking about can I get four? Can I get six
Mhm.
of this? Historically, we really love Cruzan rum. We think it plays the best with what we do, but so that's the majority of what we get is Cruzan. But there have been times where it's like, well, we need rum. Who's that manufacturer? Okay, we'll give it a go. Again, it's the benefit of being smaller
Mhm.
is, we don't have to fight the same fight that the major players do, where every time you buy that product, you want it to taste exactly like it's been the last 20 times
Right.
you bought that product. Smaller manufacturers need to lean into the fact that, products change. We're not, there's very few of us that are operating, a 6-story tall continuous column that's making, the identical juice with quality assurance people tasting their all distillate every day. We are small, we are craft. There will be variation, and that's a good
Mhm.
thing, in our opinion. So if there are some that are Cruzan and there are some that are others, um, congratulations, you're going to get to have a new experience
Mhm.
a lot of the times that you try it.
And I like that. It's more of like a vintage approach, like wines have, where
Correct.
like
Yeah.
it's the same label, but it's a different flavor every year because it's an agricultural product, right? Like the crop itself is going to change, and then what you put it in is going to change because the thing that you put it in is also an agricultural crop. Like there's a lot of variables, and finding consistency only comes with very 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 large batches, which is what the big guys can do, which is great for them. But we like to live on the edges of taste and try something that's new. And I noticed at least the rum finish that I have was a 2 barrel blend. I assume they're all going to be small. Now, do you try to keep at least the same rum brand barrels? That's going to be the blend, or you just say, hey, these two taste really good. If we blend them together, they'll be fine too.
More the latter. I mean, we
Mhm.
base everything off of taste more than obviously some age is
Mhm.
required, but it comes down because again, all of our batches are small batches in the grand scheme of things. So we can taste every barrel that goes into every batch, and us as co-founders and our production team make those decisions together, to put out the best possible product we can. So if that means cross utilizing, one rum barrel versus another, we're never going to shy away from it. Again,
Mhm.
it's all about putting the best product forward, whatever that may be. Again, a majority of ours are Cruzan rum. They might all be that at this point in time, but I know historically we've had some others
Mhm.
enter that. So your batch was most likely two Cruzan rum barrels, but if it weren't, we wouldn't have shied away from it.
Mhm. And I promise this is the last question around barrels specifically, but do you use the rum barrels just once and then dispose of them, or do you do multiple fill on rum barrels?
We use them just once.
Okay.
What we've seen, it's hard to get other people's, not everyone's forthright about how long they finish,
Mhm.
things like that. I mean, you'll have some that'll do it for 30 days. You have others who will, do it for 6 months. I mean, the majority of our finishes are usually a year or more finishing in there. Um, but after that, no, we discard those barrels.
Mhm.
A lot of our stuff is also, I don't, we're finding out if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but a lot of it is via single barrel. So
Mhm.
the moment someone selects that, they're taking that barrel with them anyway. Um, so yeah, we only use them once. Probably a terrible economic decision, but yeah, that's how we've operated.
Well, we don't live in a world that's like Scotch, where their climate, or Scotland, where their climate allows for multiple uses of the same barrel and continuing to extract. It's pretty. I think, at least for Kentucky, Indiana, even Tennessee, it's pretty violent, the amount of flavor that you're pulling out of a barrel in any given time. So multiple use, especially with a previously aged spirit in there, could be pretty rough. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit, right? So, you've talked about kind of the bourbon and whiskey specific space is sort of kind of slowing down on consumers, but at least from what I've read, on premise tourism type things are still kind of surging upwards, and you guys have a facility where people can come visit. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I'm sitting in it as we speak. So in 2020, 2019, 2020, us as a board, our shareholders, said, what are the next steps? At that point, we were operating a 3,000 square foot distillery and tasting room with an additional 10,000 square foot warehouse. But it was, how do we get our name out there? How do we grow this brand? Because even in the state of Indiana, there's more growth to be had for us. To this day, there still is. And so, our plan was, none of these big craft distilleries out there are operating without a large facility that people can come live, experience their brand. And so we purchased property in 2020 and broke ground on our current home, which is a 30,000 square foot facility. About half of that is production space, and then the other half is hospitality related business. So we have a bottle bar, tasting area, retail. We have a family friendly 300 seat restaurant, which has been a headache in its own right, but it's near and dear to our hearts. We have an over 21 cocktail lounge that's separate from the restaurant, as well as a event center that's fire rated up to like 666 people. So we've greatly expanded our access to customers. When you talk about going from a 3,000 square foot distillery where 500 square feet of it is a tasting room to a 30,000 square foot facility where 15,000 square feet of it is hospitality related. It's a massive jump. It's increased our exposure greatly. It's had its own headaches. We were a 10 or 12 person team in July of 2022, and by August we were a 95 person team. So that it's been an adventure, a challenge, but our facility is fantastic, and now we're doing even more. We just opened a new bar in downtown Indianapolis, which is a whole new concept for us. It's called Rise and Revel. It's a coffee bar in the morning, and a whiskey forward cocktail bar by night. So that just launched in March, and I doubt it will be the last cocktail bar that we open. As you mentioned, hospitality related aspect of the business is doing fairly well, and so as distribution hurts for everybody, it's in our opinion the perfect time to
Mm-hmm.
continue to invest, not hide from it. It's just, where do you invest, and how do you do it, and how do you get liquid to lips?
Yeah, and so you guys went from opening up a distillery, which has all sorts of legal overhead and financial concerns, to leaning into restaurants, which is a whole bunch of legalities and financial concerns. And you've got one of you is kind of centered on science, and you've got a legal background. Do you have a hospitality person, or did you guys like grow up working in restaurants, or did you just kind of jump into it and see what happens?
No, again, it goes back to earlier in the conversation. A certain level of naivety is important, I guess. Maybe not important. Maybe it's brash and foolish. But going kind of to how we all three interact as co-founders. Again, yeah, Julian is the head of our distilling, head of our production. He is the science arm of the business, and then Blake and I function as co-CEOs. But he's more outward facing, so marketing, sales, business development, or distribution partnerships, whereas I'm more internally facing. So I get the privilege and joy of kind of tackling the hospitality related things. And we've brought in experts in the past. When we opened our 30,000 square foot facility, we had a lot of people in place that had great hospitality experience. I'll tell you that while it looked great on paper, the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding didn't work out initially. So it was on us to learn very quickly the inner workings of the restaurant space. Obviously, the mixology and cocktail bar aspect of it we've done, before this facility was open, and we're fantastic at that. But the restaurant, that took 9 months of failure and missing out on lots of didn't miss out on lots of revenue, missed out on lots of profit
Mhm.
during that time period, just based off of mistakes that were made. But we learn on the fly. We call it building the airplane while in flight.
Yep.
It's kind of the West Fork way, it seems. So we've tackled all the issues. The restaurant now is running smoother than it ever has. And as entrepreneurs, you don't have the luxury of always hiring experts and bringing on help. You have a fiduciary duty to yourselves and your shareholders, and sometimes you have to roll up your sleeves and figure it out yourselves, no matter what your background is.
Yeah, and there's in entrepreneurialism, there's some degree of audacious ignorance that everyone has, right? Because a lot of people try these things and fail miserably, and just assuming you can because you're you is audacious. And it's not an insult. I don't want that to sound like an insult. There's a
Yeah,
high degree of that, and just about everyone I've talked to that does, that builds a craft distillery, they start off. Um, with a degree of confidence that just because you don't know yet, that's the only reason you can't have it. And you kind
yeah,
of, work your way through it. That's the people who end up winning are the people that have kind of the grit to them, the
yeah.
willingness to always want to win. Now, so you have, restaurant, cocktail lounge, now there's a bar situation, and food and beverage combinations are really important to, people, but specifically to you guys. So um what kind of food and cocktail pairings do you recommend? And I guess if I want to experience the full range of your products, like, what do I need to do? Do I need to make certain kind of cocktails? Like, how do I interact with it?
I mean, when it comes to the beverage aspect of it, I'll probably get this wrong, but I want to say it was Jimmy Rutledge. But when it comes to whiskey, as long as you're drinking it, that's all we care about.
Mhm.
I don't care if you're mixing it with a Sprite, drinking it cask strength neat,
Mhm.
mixing it up in cocktails. You know, we're we don't care at the
Mhm.
end of the day, as long as people are experiencing the product. Generally, the way it goes is people start with mixology. They start with the craft cocktails, where you're sometimes highlighting it, but oftentimes you're hiding the flavor of the spirit. You're hiding that bite, that true essence of the spirit by adding sugar, citrus, herbs, spices, whatever it may be. And that's a great way to get introduced to the product. Whenever we first opened a cocktail bar, we talked about laws, regulations. We were an artisan distiller's permit, so we could not use any mixers, any other alcohols, basically just bitters and things that we produced
Mhm.
ourselves. And we couldn't sell wine, we couldn't sell beer, and so we had to attract a vast amount of people who weren't whiskey drinkers to come experience, our brand, our facility. Um, and we had to offer them things that didn't taste at all like whiskey. Um, and we had to be super versatile because we don't make tequila. At that time, we didn't bottle vodka, gin, things like that. So
Mhm.
we had to do it all via mixology. So it's very important to introduce people to whiskey and bourbon via mixology, and from there, generally they're going to develop. Their palate's going to adjust. Maybe they go from a citrus forward, super flavorful, hiding the whiskey cocktail to eventually they start drinking old fashions or Manhattans. And then from there, they're going to start, like maybe I just want a highball with, bourbon and sparkling water. And then over time, could take decades, they're going to be that person who's buying that cast strength bottle and drinking it in a Glencairn.
Mhm.
On the food aspect of it, it's actually a wild thing because we've been uh, obviously experiencing it for the last, August will be 3 years our restaurant's been open. Initially we kind of gave people what we thought they would want. We'd stick to, there are certain things that you might not know, but Indiana is known for their breaded pork tenderloins.
Mhm.
That's kind of our signature sandwich and dish in the state of Indiana, and so we'll always have that. That's never going anywhere, and that's always, if it's not our best seller, it's a top two or three bestseller, no
Mhm.
matter what the menu has on it. So we always lean into what's Indiana, what makes this our home, what we're proud of from a culinary aspect. But recently we've gotten a little bit more out there with things that you generally wouldn't anticipate seeing going to a whiskey distillery and going to a restaurant in a whiskey distillery. Like, we have tuna tartare on our menu right now, and it sells.
Mhm.
And as owners, we were shocked. The chefs, wanted to do it, and we said we're going to sell one of these maybe in 3 months.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, it sold. You think about it, people will drink, an old fashioned, I believe, is still the number one cocktail in America.
Mhm.
And they're getting sold at Asian restaurants, Mexican restaurants, American gastropubs, whatever it may be. People are experiencing whiskey and food pairings in a very different way than I obviously ever intended or expected, which is awesome to see. It's not on us to say, no, if you're going to drink bourbon, you need to have barbecue with it, or you need to be eating a burger, or, no, you can drink bourbon with a really beautiful, salmon dish. There's nothing holding it back. And so I, I don't know that we're at the forefront. It kind of feels like we are, though, in terms of mixing that culinary aspect
Mhm.
with, traditional bourbon expectations. Um, so yeah, I'd say try it all if you're visiting the facility.
Yeah, I think you're touching on the thing that's happening, because a couple things. Number one, most of the people that come into your restaurant or your bar are probably not going to be whiskey drinkers, right? So they're going to want a cocktail. They're going to want something else. They're being brought there probably by one whiskey person, and there may be two or three or four other people with them that are just there because, hey, I want to do the experience, and the food helps kind of bring in a different audience as well. Somebody who may not necessarily be showing up for the whiskey, but they get the whiskey because they wanted to try the tuna tartare. Because how many places are offering tuna tartare on a regular basis?
Yep.
Not a ton, but you mentioned a few minutes ago about your cocktail bar opening up in downtown Indianapolis. Makes a ton of sense because there's going to be concerts, there's going to be football games, there's going to be the Indy 500. You have a captive audience of people that are going to want to have a drink when they're out doing something in a city. But how does the sort of the experience of the downtown Indianapolis cocktail bar compare to what's happening to your local cocktail bar?
So it's Indianapolis and Westfield, where our massive facility is, are really very different places.
Mhm.
Especially where we're at in Indy, it's a neighborhood called Fountain Square, which is, it's a walking neighborhood. People are out and about. It's in the heart of what's going on in Indianapolis as a city. Whereas Westfield, 10 years ago, this was just cornfields. It's like the seventh fastest growing city in the nation now. It's been a great place to call home, but they are polar opposites. But at the end of the
Mhm.
day, Indianapolis is the mixology capital of Indiana. That's where you know all the advances being made in mixology. And I'm not an expert in it. I don't know if there are more advances to be made, but I know new cocktails come out all the time. I mean, that's
Mhm.
where it is. I mean, that's the cocktail scene in central Indiana. And it was our home for the first, really, until September of last year. We closed that old distillery down and tasting room. So it was our home for a long time, and we always wanted to have a presence there.
Mhm.
That's why we went back into Indy. We believe that we were at the forefront of mixology for a long time down there, and we don't want to abandon that. So differences. We don't do food. It's not a restaurant down there, which is a relief, going back to the, mixology and alcohol side of the business more than the culinary side, just because, anyone who's ever owned or ran a restaurant or worked in a restaurant knows how chaotic and difficult that can be from time to time. Whereas a cocktail bar can, run with a few people, and do it very well. So it's more focused on mixology, and we add in the coffee aspect of it, which is very new to us. Just like opening a restaurant, we've never owned a coffee bar,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been doing it now for 45 days. So we're learning on the fly with that as well. It's a new, unique challenge for us, but it's also exciting because we're open like every day of the week now, which we've never done before, and much greater hours. So it's more ability to introduce people to our brand, even if they are just having coffee, they're at least doing it in our facility, experiencing our aesthetic, how we operate it from a
Mm-hmm.
service perspective. It's all the same whether you're drinking whiskey or not. It's the West Fork brand and it's the West Fork experience.
So yeah, and the Venn diagram of coffee people and whiskey people is pretty close to a circle. There's a lot of crossover that's there, and you could probably explore the idea of, are you going to do your own bourbon cream so you can put that in coffee? Or are you going to kind of age beans in coffee barrels, because that's a thing that people are doing too.
Yep.
But if I think more about the West Fork facility in Westfield, you visit Indy when you visit Indy, right? You're going to go to an event or whatever. But if I want to come out and visit West Fork, is there a time of the year, or are there special events that happen? Like, is there a time when it's like, this is the best time to plan your visit to come out to Westfield?
Uh, we haven't gone into really, other than it's in Westfield, as to where it is
Mm-hmm.
specifically in Westfield. So we intentionally built our facility directly across the street from one of the largest youth sports complexes in the nation. It's called Grand Park. They see about, based on the last numbers that the city released, 5.5 million people a year come to a youth sporting event there. We've heard, we've seen some data that shows when it comes to like a sports facility, it sees more than like Lucas Oil, Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I think it's like, I've heard crazy things that it's like just behind like, Madison Square Garden, in terms of like the cell phone data. So it gets crazy here during the summers, just because every weekend there's a 50, 60, 70,000 person sporting
Mm-hmm.
event, whether it be soccer, baseball, football, lacrosse. So I would not caution people, but just make it known that we are in an area that's super crowded on certain weekends in the summer,
Mm-hmm.
with all the youth sports going on, which is great for our business. But some people don't like traffic, crowds, things like that. Obviously, Indiana, where you're at, Kentucky as well. Fall is just an amazing time of
Mm-hmm.
year. It seems like it only lasts for about 4 days, but those days that we hit the you know 40s to 60 degree days and the leaves are changing. I mean, that's always my recommendation throughout all of the Midwest, as the greatest time of year to get out and about. But there's never a bad time to come see us. If you really want to help me out, come January and February, whenever it's very slow, we could use all the help we can get during those time frames.
Yeah, and you're right. Yeah, there's, well, I guess at least around here, there's first fall, there's second fall, there's third fall, there's fourth fall, and sometimes it's summer resurges back in again. Sometimes it's an early, we'll have fall and then we'll have snow at Halloween, and then we'll have summer again in November.
Yep.
This is the region we live in, and I know we're getting relatively close on time, so I want to kind of be aware of that.
Yep.
Um, Kind of walking backwards just a little bit and talking about the Hamer line, and some of the whiskeys that you guys are making. Are there any? So we've mentioned the double oak. We've mentioned the rum. There's a Hamer 10 that's out, which is a 10-year release. Are there any product launches on the horizon that you want to talk about?
On the Hamer side, which again, West Fork products are back in distribution, but the
Mhm.
Hamer line is certainly the bulk of our distribution throughout the multiple states that we're that we're in, and our online direct to consumer business as well. The 10-year release is a big one. It's the oldest bourbon we've ever released. It's selling very well. We're incredibly proud of it. But the exciting thing is that it's continuing to age. So what could be next? I know we have some barrels that are creeping up on 12. So I think something along those lines is certainly a possibility in the future. Wide scale distribution products. On the Hamer side, I don't see any big changes. We are looking at a bit of a package change up on that. Just kind of repositioning, going a little bit more custom, and so we're incredibly excited about that aspect of the Hamer lineup, and maybe change a few things here and there in regards to proofs. But we're gonna, sometimes we've gotten over our skis with too many products. We're not a Buffalo Trace that can have the 100 SKUs that they have, and and all that. We need to really focus on what we do well, and at the end of the day, what sells well. And so, we're not trying to get over our skis too much on having too many SKUs. A lot of the things that we do are going to be limited, just because that's the nature of our business. We don't have unlimited inventory. So we do a lot of things on a small scale. So, my recommendation would be keep an eye on our social media and our website, because especially with this new age of being able to sell to distributors in other states that who then can also ship to people's doorsteps. We can do very small scale things that people in a very large area can get access to. And it might be that, hey, here's a Hamer release that is 3 barrels, and when it's gone, and we won't have any more of it for another 2 years. Again, we get to be versatile because of our size. It's tragic whenever something's so good and then it's like, well, we sold out of it immediately and it's not coming back for quite some time. But again, we'll stick to our main SKUs, the 3 core bourbon SKUs, the 2 finishes, and for the time being, Old Hamer 10. And then, sporadically we'll always get some crazy ideas and do something unique, and let people get it while it's available.
Yeah, and you mentioned this, right? And so as you're sort of reestablishing the footing of West Fork's house brand, what should we be watching out for with it?
Right now, I think it's also in the mix in terms of a little bit of a branding redesign. We're asking a lot of hard questions internally. Going back to how many SKUs do we have? We have 5 standard SKUs right now, 6. So we have a 100% unaged corn whiskey. We have a wheated bourbon, a high rye bourbon, a rye whiskey, a cinnamon whiskey, a lot going on that side as well. And especially on the distribution front, that's great in our tasting rooms in our facility here, because people love the fact that they can come in here and they can try at any given point like 40 different bourbons that are all ours, which is great. But when you talk about distribution, getting product on shelves, what does that look like? What proofs, what mash bills? Should it be 1 mash bill? Should it be 2? Should it be a blend? Should we do what we do a lot of time and say, let's just make the best batch of whiskey. I don't really care which mash bill's in it, because we've made 3 standard mash bills for 5-6 years now, and they play really nicely together. We've done blends in the past, so we're having those internal discussions, as we speak, in regards to what do we do moving forward. With the product, mainly on the distribution side, again, that is going to be out there and available in this ever more and more competitive market, battling not so much with craft producers, but that influx of bourbon that we talked about, that to 6 year old bourbon that's going to hit the market. And talk about international markets kind of getting shut down over the last
Mhm.
little bit of time, so that's just more bourbon that's going to need to be sold in the United States. So it's going to be unique to see what people are doing with price points, what they're doing with all of it. Are we going to be in a world that you can like it was a decade ago, that you can get Blanton's, Eagle Rare, Weller every time you go to the liquor store?
Mhm.
We'll see. So yeah, I mean, nothing huge to announce on
Mhm.
new product front, especially like wide scale distribution wise. But we release new stuff at our facility in Westfield and our other cocktail bar monthly. It seems so. If you're in the area or in drivable distance, certainly keep an eye on what we release, because it's generally 15 to 30 cases of it, and it
Mhm.
goes very, very quickly.
It's always good when you're winning home base, right? Like in the place where you physically are, people are clamoring to grab a hold of a thing, and you guys, effectively shut down the sales of the product for about 4 or 5 years. So it would feel like you've got a pretty healthy stock of things that you can sell, right? And so as
Yep.
we think about what happens in the next 18 to 24 months within the whiskey space, I think you guys probably have enough to make sure that you're going to be there, right? Because you're not going to sell through and be like, shit, we didn't plan our liquid strategy well 5 years ago. Because you're always making a bet 5 years in advance of what's going to happen
Yep.
with the marketplace. So if you were to kind of try to look 5 years in the future for now, do you see any changes to West Fork or to Hamer or to any of those things? Do you kind of reemphasize West Fork and Hamer becomes like an LTO, or do you lean into what do you think the 5 year strategy is? Because I assume you've probably had this conversation. You've got a board, you've got shareholders, you've got things to
Yeah.
discuss.
Yeah, it's I'd say it's an ongoing discussion. It's been a discussion that's been ongoing for a decade now. Um, our big thing is adapt and overcome. Be ready to make changes. It would be super simple if I could just say, "Here's our plan, and we are going to do exactly that."
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do exactly that for 60 to 90 days, and then it could completely shift. I mean, a lot of that's dictated by the market.
Mm-hmm.
What's happening there. 5 years from now, the Hamer brand is going, not not going away. It
Mm-hmm.
won't be an LTO. That is something that we will always partner with MGP on that product. We've gotten close to 10,000 barrels of that produced for us. So that will continue to just grow and be pushed hard. Again, it's such a unique mash bill that's not being utilized by many other people. And after MGP stopped producing that mash bill 4 or 5 years ago, we control a lot of it, which is great. So that will still be humming. No changes to that. On the West Fork side, as I mentioned, we've been producing 3 mash bills for a long time. A high corn, a wheated, a high rye. And as I talked about, we're in discussions as to what does West Fork look like in the future. What mash bills should we be focusing on,
Mm-hmm.
and how do we differentiate ourselves? There's a lot of people who, and we've been, some of them that produce a fairly Kentucky-esque mash bill, just doing it in a different state. And I think that creating that niche and differentiating is important. But those are decisions that are being made now. And when you talk about a 5 year plan, those are things that won't see a glass bottle for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So in the meantime, how do we innovate based off of the inventory that we've built up over the last 5 years? How do we finish different? How do we position ourselves as a brand? Those are the tough questions, and those are the hard ones that you have to try to answer, and you have to do your best to position your company to compete whenever it's going to be the hardest competition that we've seen in our company's life cycle moving forward. So it'll be a battle, and we'll continue to grow, adapt, overcome, do everything we can to make ourselves proud, make the state of Indiana proud.
So, in one last question, so January, February, I come to Westfield, right? Because that's the time to come to Westfield, to come to the West Fork to site specifically. And, I'm going to pick up Hamer because that's one of the product lines. But if I'm going to pick up one of the other three, whether it be the high corn, the high rye, or the wheated, which one's your favorite? Which one should I purchase based off of this is the identity of West Fork?
I would say it's not because it's my favorite, but it's because it's the first bourbon we ever sold. It's been our best selling grain to glass distillate for the last the first launch of it was in 2016, end of 2015. 2016 timeframe is our wheated bourbon mash bill. Is our original bourbon mash bill. It's been our most award-winning grain to glass distillate. It's near and dear to my heart because it used to be called the Colonel, which was paying tribute to my father, who was a colonel in the Army until his passing. So it's always held a special place in our hearts as a distillery, and it's always our top selling West product. Year over year. If you don't take out special releases and things like that. So that'd be my recommendation. I mean, my go-to drinker is our house bourbon. So I'm the unique co-founder, and the hardcore bourbon people that listen to this will hate me for it, but I drink 80 proof bourbon on the rocks, whereas the other two guys only drink cast strength in a Glencairn or a Kinsey glass. So our house bourbon is a blend of all three of our mash bills, just barrels that we like, proof down to 80 proof. And I just love that it's versatile. You can use it in cocktails. You can sip it on the rocks. You can use it for about anything. So it's my go-to, but I know it's not everyone's choice to be in the 80 proof side of the bourbon world.
And honestly, I think it from my perspective, it is tougher to make a really, really good 80 proof whiskey than the barrel proof ones, because sometimes you can maybe hide behind the sting from the proof, right? It's 130 proof and you're going to lose something, but when you get it down to 80, it becomes really, really palatable, and adding water can sometimes bring out some faults, right? So if you can live at 80, there's a good degree of success. And honestly, I think we can pretend like we don't, at least from a whiskey nerd perspective, but we all sort of get tired of drinking barrel proof all the time. And so it's not a bad thing to have some good 80 proof whiskey floating around, because you can only drink so much 120,
Yeah, I generally like to have more than a couple ounces. So it's
right.
It's usually safer to be in that lower proof range.
Yeah. So, David, thank you for hopping on and having the conversation with me. I'm always surprised when people say yes, right? Because you can't make any more time and you're busy. You've got restaurants and bars and whiskey brands to run. Thanks for hopping on and having the conversation with me.
Absolutely, John. Really appreciate you chatting with me, and hopefully our paths cross again sometime.
For sure. Thanks for tuning into this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming that's on, and leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram with Embellish Pod as the handle, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.